It all started with a whisper, a barely audible rumor drifting through the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. A title, once so prestigious, now hanging by a fragile thread. Have Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, truly lost what defined them in the eyes of the world? Imagine waking up to a headline that feels like a punch in the chest, a moment that shatters perception and expectation in one swift strike. That is exactly what happened. And no one could have predicted the shockwave it would send through not just the royal family, but the entire globe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In the first few seconds of this story, it's impossible not to ask, how does a couple, adored by millions, suddenly find themselves stripped of the very titles that marked their status, their role, their identity within the monarchy? What led to this unprecedented move, and why now? These questions, simple on the surface, conceal layers of intrigue, tension, and controversy that would make even the most seasoned royal observers pause. The headlines were brutal, blunt, and unrelenting. Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles removed. Simple words. But behind those words lies a labyrinth of secrets, whispers, and silent confrontations that unfolded behind palace doors. To understand why this matters so much, we need to peel back the layers, to see not just the public image of Meghan and Harry, but the private storms they weathered. Because in the world of royals, what you see is rarely the whole story. Let's pause for a moment and consider the human element. Titles, privileges, crowns, and ceremonial roles. These are not mere words. They represent legacy, history, responsibility, and power. For Meghan and Harry, losing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles isn't just symbolic. It cuts at the core of identity, at the intersection of personal choice and centuries-old tradition. How do you navigate a world where your very identity can be revoked by protocol, by decree, by forces you cannot fully control? Would you fight or step back? Would you accept or resist? And yet, the timing of this revelation is as shocking as the act itself. After years of intense media scrutiny, public debates, and private conflicts, this moment feels almost like the climax of a drama meticulously unfolding in real time. It's the culmination of whispers, leaks, financial disputes, and family disagreements, many of which the public only caught glimpses of, scattered across headlines, social media, and obscure reports. But the full story? That remained behind the palace walls, until now. Imagine, for a moment, the scene inside the palace the day the decision was finalized. Advisors pacing in ornate rooms, a hush of tension filling the corridors, fingers hovering over phones, messages flying between aides and officials. The weight of history pressing down, reminding everyone that few events in modern royal history carry this magnitude. And then, the decree is issued. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, stripped of their titles. A shockwave that ripples far beyond the palace gates, landing squarely in the homes, social feeds, and minds of millions around the world. But it wasn't just a news story. It was personal. For Meghan Markle, whose journey into the royal family was marked by struggle, adaptation, and relentless media attention, this moment was another chapter in a life defined by scrutiny. For Prince Harry, a prince who has navigated loss, duty, and expectation, this represented not just a public setback, but a private reckoning with family, legacy, and self-determination. We can't overlook the broader context. The monarchy, an institution that thrives on tradition, ceremony, and hierarchy, suddenly faced a moment of unprecedented public curiosity. Every decision, every word, every facial expression would be analyzed, dissected, and debated across continents. Social media erupted. Pundits weighed in. Royal commentators scrambled to provide explanations, theories, and predictions. Yet amid all the noise, the truth remained layered, complex, and, in many ways, hidden. This story is more than just a tale of titles lost. It's a story of tension between personal freedom and public expectation, between love and duty, between media frenzy and private despair. And as we unpack the events that led to this extraordinary decision, one thing becomes clear. This is not just about Meghan and Harry. It's about a system, a family, and a global audience grappling with the collision of modernity and tradition. Let's also talk about the contradictions, because they're everywhere. On one hand, Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties, seeking independence, privacy, and control over their lives. On the other hand, the royal protocols and expectations they inherited didn't allow for such separation without consequences. Publicly, they were celebrated for courage and initiative. Privately, they were facing an institution that measures loyalty and legacy in strict, unforgiving terms. This dichotomy between admiration and judgment, love and loss, fuels the emotional core of the story. And there's more. Behind the headlines, there are whispers of internal struggles, heated conversations with advisors, discreet warnings from senior royals, and tensions between family members. Imagine being caught between your own desires and the weight of centuries of expectation, feeling every decision magnified, every misstep judged, every alliance questioned. That's the world Meghan and Harry navigated, a world in which a title isn't just a title, but a symbol of trust, status, and alignment with an entire monarchy. Now, ask yourself, what would you do if your very identity, your place in history, could be erased with a single declaration? How do you respond when the world watches, waiting for your reaction, ready to judge your every move? These are the stakes. And these are the questions we'll explore in depth over the course of this video. Even more shocking, this story isn't linear. It's filled with twists, betrayals, and moments where the narrative we thought we understood suddenly flips on its head. From financial disputes to alleged secret communications, from family tensions to media pressure. Every factor intertwines, creating a web of intrigue that few outside the palace walls could fully understand. And here's the thing. While many have reported the news in snippets, very few have pieced it together in a cohesive narrative that captures the emotional and historical significance of the moment. That's what we're going to do. Over the next hour, we'll take you inside the palace, inside the minds of Meghan and Harry, and reveal the series of events, both public and private, that led to the removal of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. We'll start with the immediate aftermath, the shock, the social media storm, the global conversation. Then we'll go deeper, exploring the behind-the-scenes tensions, the family dynamics, the media pressures, and the unprecedented decisions that shaped this outcome. Along the way, we'll ask hard questions. Was this preventable? Who truly pushed for this decision? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of the monarchy and the couple themselves? By the end of this introduction, one thing will be clear. The story you thought you knew is only the beginning. There are secrets, twists, and revelations that will challenge what you believe about Meghan, Harry, and the monarchy itself. The drama is far from over, and the stakes have never been higher. And just when you think you've grasped the full picture, the cliffhanger emerges. Despite losing their titles, rumors swirl that Meghan and Harry may have been involved in decisions and communications that could reshape the royal landscape once more. No one saw this coming. Not the media, not the public, and perhaps not even the royal family themselves. That was the sentiment rippling through London and across the world the day news broke that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had been stripped of their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. At first glance, it seemed like just another headline in a long saga of royal drama. But dig deeper, and you realize this was a seismic event, shaking the monarchy to its very core. Imagine waking up one morning, checking your phone, and seeing those words in bold: Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles removed. For the average person, it might seem abstract: titles, privileges, pomp. But for millions who have followed Harry and Meghan's journey, it felt personal. It was a moment that crystallized years of tension, speculation, and unprecedented moves in the royal family. How did it get to this point? What triggered a decision that carries both personal and historical weight? The first shockwave was public reaction. Social media erupted instantly. Hashtags trended within minutes, and debates ignited in every corner of the internet. Supporters expressed outrage at what they perceived as harsh treatment, while critics saw it as long overdue accountability. Commentators dissected every detail: the timing, the phrasing, the implications. News channels scrambled for explanations, pulling in royal experts to interpret what, to most viewers, seemed almost unfathomable. But behind the headlines, the story was far more complex. The palace, typically a fortress of discretion, was in turmoil. Staff rushed to draft statements, advisors convened emergency meetings, and the weight of centuries of protocol pressed down on every decision. Imagine the tension in those rooms. Ancient traditions colliding with modern public scrutiny, a family grappling with private emotions under an unrelenting spotlight. Every word, every gesture, every email had consequences. What's often overlooked in these moments is the human side of the story. Titles, as lofty as they sound, carry immense personal significance. They are symbols of identity, responsibility, and legacy. For Meghan, the loss of her title represented a profound shift in her public persona and her private world. For Harry, it was a reminder of the difficult balancing act between personal freedom and familial duty, a balancing act he has navigated since the loss of his mother, Princess Diana. How do you reconcile personal happiness with centuries of expectation? How do you respond when the world watches your every reaction, waiting for signs of defiance, sorrow, or acceptance? Even the public reaction had layers of contradiction. Many celebrated Meghan and Harry for their independence, applauding their courage to step back from royal duties. Yet, in the same breath, critics accused them of disrespecting tradition and overstepping boundaries. The very qualities that once earned them admiration were now used to justify a controversial decision. This tension between public perception and private reality is the heartbeat of the shockwave, the thing that made this moment feel electric, unavoidable, and deeply personal. And there was another layer. For months, rumors had circulated of behind-the-scenes tensions within the palace. Whispered arguments, private warnings, and delicate negotiations, all shielded from the public eye. Yet, when the announcement was finally made, these whispers coalesced into a public story, leaving many to wonder, was this the result of months of careful planning or a spontaneous reaction to a new revelation? The truth, as always with royal matters, is somewhere in between, a mixture of calculated decisions and human emotion. To understand the shockwave fully, it's important to look at the immediate aftermath. As soon as the news hit, royal aides worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Official statements were released, carefully worded to maintain dignity and decorum. At the same time, the palace scrambled to anticipate the global reaction. How would allies, foreign dignitaries, and domestic supporters interpret this unprecedented move? The ripple effect was immense. Analysts predicted not just short-term media storms, but long-term implications for the monarchy's relationship with the public. And yet, the story is not just about institutions and protocols. There's the raw human emotion. Meghan reportedly spent hours with close confidants processing the news, reflecting on the years of work, public appearances, and sacrifices that culminated in this moment. Harry, too, was said to be grappling with anger, frustration, and disbelief. A prince accustomed to public scrutiny now faced a different kind of spotlight, one focused not on his actions, but on the status he was being denied. The timing amplified the shock. The couple had carefully curated a life that balanced independence and visibility, stepping back from royal duties yet maintaining a global platform. Many expected negotiations to preserve their titles in some capacity, perhaps symbolic roles or ceremonial acknowledgments. The sudden removal of their titles, therefore, felt like a rupture, a decisive act that defied expectations and reshaped the narrative entirely. We must also consider the media's role in this shockwave. Every outlet, from tabloids to international broadcasters, amplified the story with its own lens. Some framed it as a necessary correction, restoring tradition and protocol. Others presented it as an emotional and personal blow, highlighting the human cost. The contradiction between these narratives fueled heated debates, leaving audiences uncertain about what to believe. And in that uncertainty, curiosity thrived. Viewers couldn't look away, eager to discover what really happened behind closed doors. The palace's internal response was equally compelling. Advisors and family members reportedly engaged in intense discussions, weighing loyalty against precedent. There were mentions of confidential communications, memos circulated to gauge reactions, and discreet warnings issued to both the couple and the broader public relations team. The sense of urgency and high stakes created an atmosphere of tension that few outsiders could imagine. In essence, history was being written, silently and quickly, behind the ornate doors of Buckingham Palace. Amidst all this, one cannot ignore the global implications. Royals are not just local figures. They are symbols with international resonance. The removal of the Sussex titles sent ripples through the Commonwealth and beyond. Diplomats, monarchists, and even casual observers began to debate the significance, reflecting on what it meant for the monarchy's image, succession, and modern relevance. It was a story that transcended borders, touching cultures, media markets, and hearts worldwide. And yet, despite all the public attention, there remained an undeniable secrecy. What prompted this decision? What conversations unfolded in private rooms? Which voices carried the most weight? Here, the drama deepens. Sources hinted at meetings that went late into the night, with advisors presenting stark choices and family members wrestling with loyalty, love, and protocol. The narrative that reached the public eye was only a fraction of the total story, a fraction that hinted at far more explosive developments waiting to be revealed. As viewers, it's natural to ask, could this have been avoided? Were there signs, warnings, or opportunities to negotiate a different outcome? The answers are complicated. In the palace, where history, protocol, and perception intertwine, every decision carries immense weight. One misstep can have ramifications for decades. The shockwave that hit the public eye was, in many ways, the visible manifestation of years of invisible tension. Even the supporters of the Sussexes found themselves grappling with a complex mix of emotions. Pride in their resilience, sorrow at the symbolic loss, and curiosity about what came next. All blended into a collective response that was global, immediate, and deeply emotional. Social media posts ranged from outraged condemnations to heartfelt empathy, reflecting the polarization that has characterized much of Meghan and Harry's public life. And now, as we consider the immediate shock and its implications, one question lingers. What was the moment that truly triggered this decisive action? Was it a misstep in public behavior, a perceived breach of protocol, or a culmination of tensions that had been simmering for years? The answer lies in the next chapter, behind the palace doors, where private meetings, secret communications, and high-stakes negotiations set the stage for this historic moment. But the shockwave was only the beginning. What came next would unravel more secrets, reveal alliances and betrayals, and set the stage for conflicts that few outside the royal inner circle could have imagined. The story of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was far from over, and the next revelations would challenge everything we thought we knew about titles, loyalty, and the intricate machinery of monarchy. The palace, the public, and the couple themselves were all caught in a moment of history. A moment that demanded answers, demanded clarity, and promised drama. And yet, as with any great story, the truth is never simple. The shockwave, as we now see, was just the opening act of a story that continues to unfold, a story of ambition, emotion, secrecy, and power. What really happens behind the palace doors? What conversations, whispers, and secret meetings determine the fates of princes and duchesses? For the public, the monarchy is a glittering facade. Red carpets, ceremonial gowns, and endless photo ops. But the real story, the one that shapes history, unfolds behind layers of walls, heavy doors, and guarded corridors. And in the case of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, it was behind these doors that decisions were made that would shock the world. The first thing to understand is the gravity of the moment. Stripping a royal of a title is not merely an administrative procedure. It is a symbolic act that carries centuries of precedent, familial implications, and political weight. In order to execute such a decision, countless private meetings took place, often under tense and emotional circumstances. Advisors, lawyers, senior royals, and palace officials all had a voice, some loud, some subtle, and each influence was measured against tradition, public perception, and the unpredictable reactions of the couple themselves. Imagine the scene. An ornate room with tall windows, sunlight filtering through, yet tension thick enough to block the warmth. Advisors sit in a tight circle, papers scattered, phones buzzing with messages. The air hums with urgency. Every word spoken carries potential consequences not just for Meghan and Harry, but for the monarchy's image worldwide. Protocols are referenced, historical precedents weighed, and contingencies debated. This is not mere planning. This is a high-stakes chess game, and every move counts. According to insiders, the initial discussions were anything but cordial. There were disagreements about tone, approach, and timing. Some argued for a private conversation with the couple first. Others insisted that a public announcement was inevitable. There were debates over phrasing, headlines, and the subtle distinction between removal of duties versus removal of titles. One can almost hear the whispers echoing through the corridors. How do we convey authority without cruelty? How do we maintain dignity while enforcing rules? These questions, simple on the surface, reveal the complex calculus that shapes royal decisions. The tension wasn't limited to advisors and staff. Senior family members played pivotal roles in these deliberations. King Charles, burdened with the responsibility of balancing family loyalty with institutional duty, reportedly weighed every option carefully. For him, it wasn't just about titles. It was about precedent, reputation, and legacy. How do you uphold centuries of tradition while accommodating the unprecedented steps taken by a modern royal couple? How do you ensure the monarchy remains respected, relevant, and resilient, even when internal conflicts threaten to spill into the public eye? And then there were the secrets, the private communications, discreet memos, and coded messages that flew between palace aides, legal teams, and the couple's representatives. Some messages were conciliatory, others firm, and a few downright confrontational. At times, decisions seemed to hinge on the smallest details. A phrase in a text, the timing of a public appearance, or the wording of an interview. These micro-decisions, invisible to the public, had massive ripple effects. Every subtle move could tip the balance toward reconciliation or escalation. It's also important to note the emotional undercurrents in these private deliberations. Advisors weren't just thinking in terms of law or protocol. They were observing human reactions. Meghan's drive, Harry's loyalty, potential resentment, and the intricate dynamics with other family members. One misjudgment, one underestimated emotional response, could turn a calculated decision into a public relations nightmare. And yet, despite the careful planning, emotions were raw and unpredictable, leaving palace insiders walking a delicate tightrope. At the center of these discussions was the question of fairness versus necessity. Many argued that titles were not merely ornamental. They represented public trust, ceremonial roles, and family unity. Others countered that the couple had chosen independence and, in doing so, accepted the consequences. This tension between duty and personal choice, tradition and modernity, loyalty and self-determination, is what makes the palace's deliberations so fascinating and so volatile. One source claimed that late-night meetings went on for hours, sometimes into the early morning, with King Charles and senior advisors weighing multiple scenarios. What if the announcement was delayed? What if the couple preempted the palace with their own public statement? What if the media spun it as a personal vendetta rather than a matter of protocol? Every what if carried potential consequences for both reputation and legacy. And then there was the moment when decisions shifted from discussion to action. Advisors presented recommendations. Legal teams clarified possibilities. Family members weighed emotional impacts. And somewhere in that mix, a pivotal choice was made. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles would be removed. The announcement was carefully drafted, emphasizing protocol and precedent, but the underlying truth was undeniable. A seismic shift had occurred in the royal hierarchy. Yet even as the decision was finalized, the palace remained acutely aware of the fallout. How would Meghan and Harry respond? Would they issue their own statement? Would loyalists rally in their defense? Could the media spin this into yet another controversy that threatened the monarchy's credibility? Anticipating these reactions required a level of strategic foresight akin to international diplomacy. Every angle had to be considered. And here, the drama deepens. Behind the doors, palace insiders report that not everyone agreed with the decision. Some advisors expressed concern that the announcement might damage family relationships irreparably. Others believed that the action was necessary to maintain authority and uphold centuries of tradition. These conflicting perspectives created an atmosphere thick with tension, debate, and uncertainty, a perfect storm in which history and human emotion collided. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these private discussions was the interplay between secrecy and inevitability. On one hand, palace staffers were instructed to maintain strict confidentiality. On the other, the outcome felt unavoidable. Rumors had been circulating for months, hinting at growing friction, disagreements over duties, and challenges to tradition. The palace was preparing for a confrontation that, while carefully managed, carried enormous consequences. And yet, amid all this tension, one truth became increasingly clear. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were navigating their own parallel path. Their team, aware of palace deliberations, was planning responses, statements, and strategies. Communications were discreet, sometimes coded, but never completely silent. The palace knew this, and their deliberations accounted for potential countermoves, public responses, and media amplification. In essence, both sides were engaged in a silent negotiation, a high-stakes game that the world would only see in fragments. To truly grasp the significance of these behind-the-scenes events, one must also consider historical precedent. Royal titles have rarely been revoked, and when they have, it often signals profound tension within the family or the institution itself. This wasn't a routine administrative decision. It was an extraordinary intervention with both symbolic and practical implications. Every advisor, every family member, every staffer understood that the stakes were enormous, and the consequences would reverberate for years to come. So what does this tell us about the palace, the couple, and the monarchy itself? It tells us that history is not made on stage, under cameras, or in headlines. History is made in moments of tension, in conversations that happen in private rooms, with people weighing legacy, emotion, and protocol simultaneously. The removal of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles was the product of such a moment, a combination of strategic decision-making, emotional calculus, and centuries-old tradition meeting modern expectations. And yet, despite all the planning and deliberation, one thing remained uncertain. How the public would perceive it, how Meghan and Harry would respond, and what unseen factors might still influence the outcome. Behind the palace doors, the drama was complete, but outside those doors, the story was only beginning. The headlines hid more than they revealed. Every article, every news segment, every social media post was shaping the story, but were they telling the truth? From the moment the news of Meghan and Harry losing their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles broke, the media became both a magnifying glass and a magnifier, amplifying every detail, rumor, and speculation. The story didn't just unfold. It exploded across every platform imaginable, leaving the couple, the palace, and the public scrambling to interpret the chaos. For years, Meghan and Harry had maintained a complicated relationship with the media. On one hand, media coverage amplified their platform, giving them visibility and influence on global issues. On the other, relentless scrutiny, invasive paparazzi, and sensationalized stories turned their lives into a constant battlefield. But this moment, the removal of their titles, brought that tension into sharp relief. Every headline became part of the story, every article a twist in a narrative they no longer controlled. Social media erupted within minutes. Tweets, posts, and memes flooded platforms worldwide. Some hailed the palace's decision as necessary, framing it as a lesson in duty and responsibility. Others criticized it as harsh, unfair, and emblematic of an outdated institution punishing a modern couple for daring to forge their own path. Hashtags trended for days, debates spiraled into hours-long live streams, and commentary from influencers, journalists, and celebrities added layers of complexity to the public conversation. But beyond the surface, the media played a subtler, more insidious role. Leaks, half-truths, and anonymous sources fed narratives that often contradicted each other. One day, a palace insider claimed the couple had been warned repeatedly. The next, a tabloid suggested the decision was abrupt, a reaction to a single misstep. The resulting confusion created a narrative gap, leaving audiences hungry for clarity and, simultaneously, more intrigued with every new development. Imagine how this looked from inside the palace. Advisors had to manage not only the announcement, but the inevitable media frenzy. Every word from spokespeople was scrutinized, every public reaction logged and analyzed. Containment strategies were deployed, coordinated press releases, controlled statements, and careful monitoring of social media trends. But even the best-laid plans often clashed with the unpredictable virality of online platforms. One misleading headline could spark outrage in minutes, shifting the entire conversation. And the couple themselves were not immune. Meghan and Harry had their own communications team monitoring coverage, drafting potential statements, and navigating the delicate balance between defending themselves and avoiding further escalation. Every interview, public appearance, or social media post became a potential pivot point, capable of influencing public sentiment, reigniting controversy, or reframing the narrative entirely. But the media did more than report, it framed the story. Visual imagery, selective quotations, and editorial emphasis shaped the audience's perception of events. Photos of Meghan in formal attire, smiling at an official event, were juxtaposed against headlines implying arrogance or entitlement. Harry's gestures and expressions were dissected for signs of resentment, guilt, or defiance. This framing created an emotional context, influencing how millions of viewers interpreted what was happening behind the palace doors. Moreover, the speed at which news traveled added pressure. In today's digital age, stories move faster than any official statement. Leaks spread instantly, often without verification. Analysts and commentators speculated wildly, presenting conflicting narratives as fact. For Meghan and Harry, the challenge was not just managing the official story, but responding to a rapidly evolving media environment where misinformation could overshadow truth. One particularly dramatic example involved an exclusive report claiming that the couple had been blindsided by the announcement, suggesting betrayal by close family members. Another article countered that they had been warned months in advance and had negotiated terms privately. Contradictions like these created uncertainty, amplifying curiosity and fueling public debate. Viewers were left wondering who was telling the truth and who was shaping the story for influence, clicks, or ratings. The emotional impact of media coverage cannot be overstated. For Meghan, decades of scrutiny had cultivated a keen awareness of how stories were spun. Every headline, every broadcast, was not just news. It was a reflection of judgment, expectation, and interpretation of her character. For Harry, already acutely sensitive to the consequences of public perception after the loss of his mother and years of media attention, the constant framing of events as personal drama was both frustrating and painful. But the media also created opportunities for curiosity-driven engagement. Every article, report, or broadcast teased unseen elements. What really happened behind the palace doors? Sources say. Unreported meetings suggest these narrative hooks kept the audience engaged, prompting them to click, comment, and share, and setting the stage for the next revelations. The media, in effect, became a character in the story, driving attention and shaping perception even as the actual events continued unfolding privately. One of the most fascinating aspects of media coverage was its contradictory nature. Some outlets portrayed the Sussexes as victims of an archaic system, unfairly punished for stepping outside tradition. Others depicted them as arrogant or entitled, flaunting independence while ignoring the implicit rules of the institution they joined. The result was a polarized public discourse, with supporters and critics entrenched in opposing camps. This division amplified engagement, further extending the life of the story in both traditional and social media channels. Direct audience engagement also played a role. Social media polls, comments, and user-generated content became part of the narrative, reflecting collective opinion and shaping subsequent reporting. Every viral post or trending hashtag influenced how journalists, commentators, and even palace communications teams approached the unfolding events. In effect, the public became a co-author of the story, their reactions shaping not only perception but strategy. Yet despite the cacophony, the palace maintained a careful strategic approach. Statements were crafted to emphasize procedural correctness, historical precedent, and dignity. Every word was weighed for impact. Phrasing, tone, and timing were critical. Even minor missteps could ignite a new wave of coverage or reinterpretation. The stakes were enormous, with global attention amplifying the consequences of every decision. The media's role extended beyond reporting. It also pressured key players to act, framing the narrative as urgent, dramatic, and consequential. Palace aides and advisors reportedly accelerated internal discussions, anticipating inevitable leaks and public scrutiny. Meghan and Harry's communications team, simultaneously responding and preempting narratives, had to navigate a delicate balance between defending the couple and avoiding escalation. The result was a highly choreographed, high-stakes dance in which every participant was acutely aware of the potential fallout. And amid all this, the emotional dimension was unmistakable. Headlines didn't just inform. They shaped feelings, perceptions, and attitudes. Sympathy, anger, curiosity, and outrage flowed through every social media post and news segment. For Meghan and Harry, the emotional toll of constant scrutiny, magnified by the stakes of their lost titles, added a human layer to the institutional and procedural drama. Perhaps the most compelling question for the audience is this. In an era dominated by 24-hour news cycles, social media virality, and global engagement, who truly controls the story? Is it the palace, the couple, the journalists, or the audience itself? The answer is both simple and complex. The story is a constantly shifting ecosystem, in which every reaction, statement, and headline contributes to a narrative that is never fully complete. And now, as the shockwave spreads and media narratives dominate public perception, the next chapter of the story begins to unfold. The financial battles, private disputes, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that fueled tensions long before headlines ever appeared. The media amplified the story, but it was only one layer of a much deeper, more complex drama, one that would test loyalties, expose vulnerabilities, and reveal truths that had remained hidden until now. Money, power, titles. In the royal world, these are never separate. They are intertwined, inseparable, and often a source of unseen conflict. While the headlines focused on the shocking removal of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, few understood the financial pressures and battles simmering quietly behind the palace doors. The reality is that wealth, funding, and control of resources often drive decisions just as much as protocol, tradition, or personal loyalty. For Meghan and Harry, stepping back from royal duties wasn't just an emotional or symbolic decision. It was financial. Their public life, charitable commitments, and personal brand had grown intertwined with both the monarchy's prestige and their own visibility. But stepping away meant navigating a minefield of funding obligations, expenses, and agreements that had always been structured under the assumption of full royal participation. Could they maintain independence while retaining the benefits of their titles? The answer, it seems, was far from simple. Inside the palace, the financial discussions were reportedly intense and meticulous. Advisors pored over budgets, allocations, and legal contracts, scrutinizing every penny connected to the Sussexes. Questions arose. How much public funding had been allocated to the couple? How did stepping back from duties affect these funds? What restrictions applied to private earnings, media deals, and philanthropic endeavors? Even small miscalculations had the potential to create scandal, embarrassment, or accusations of misuse. Sources reveal that the couple had been advised extensively on the implications of taking media contracts, securing sponsorships, and producing content under their brand. Every deal, no matter how lucrative, was a potential flashpoint. Advisors worried that a single high-profile contract could be interpreted as exploiting royal connections, undermining the monarchy, or violating agreements tied to titles and ceremonial roles. It was a delicate balancing act between autonomy and perception, with legal teams meticulously drafting guidance to minimize risk. Financial battles were not limited to public funds. The couple's private wealth, inherited assets, and investments also came under scrutiny. Decisions about residences, security expenses, and staffing required negotiation, sometimes leading to friction with senior royals who had historically overseen such matters. Advisors reportedly debated the balance between maintaining a lifestyle consistent with royal expectations and respecting the couple's desire for independence. These discussions were far from straightforward. Each compromise carried both financial and symbolic weight. Meanwhile, media speculation added pressure to an already tense situation. Every property purchase, security expenditure, or public appearance was analyzed in terms of cost, propriety, and influence. Headlines suggested extravagance or mismanagement, regardless of whether claims were accurate. This public scrutiny not only amplified tension inside the palace, but also shaped strategic decisions regarding communications, finances, and long-term planning. Meghan and Harry were navigating a world in which money, perception, and protocol collided at every turn. One particularly high-stakes issue reportedly involved security funding. As a senior royal couple, Meghan and Harry had access to extensive protective services, a necessity given ongoing threats and public attention. But stepping back from royal duties complicated these arrangements. Who would cover costs? What level of security was appropriate for individuals no longer performing official roles? The questions were more than logistical. They touched on issues of risk, safety, and responsibility. The answers required negotiation, delicate compromise, and sometimes difficult personal decisions. Adding to the complexity were the couple's philanthropic commitments. Harry's work with veterans, mental health advocacy, and charitable foundations was widely praised. Meghan's focus on women's empowerment and social issues also garnered attention and support. But funding these initiatives required transparency, careful accounting, and compliance with both legal and ceremonial expectations. Palace advisors reportedly monitored expenditures closely, ensuring that no perception of impropriety or conflict with royal standards arose. Every donation, grant, or contract became a potential flashpoint. Insiders suggest that financial disagreements were not just logistical, they were emotional. Harry, protective of his family and legacy, reportedly clashed with advisors over perceived restrictions and expectations. Meghan, determined to maintain autonomy and control over her own projects, resisted limitations that she felt undermined her independence. These tensions were compounded by the public scrutiny surrounding every decision. Money, in this case, was never just about dollars and pounds. It was a symbol of control, autonomy, and influence. Another reported source of friction involved commercial deals and media contracts. The couple's plans for book deals, streaming content, and speaking engagements were closely analyzed by the palace. Advisors worried that such ventures could be interpreted as capitalizing on royal status, particularly in light of the newly announced removal of their titles. The stakes were high. Missteps could damage the monarchy's reputation, invite legal disputes, or fuel public outrage. At the same time, denying these opportunities could strain the couple's financial independence, creating resentment and tension. The financial battle also extended to property and living arrangements. Meghan and Harry's residences, staffing, and lifestyle choices required negotiation and careful budgeting. Advisors reportedly debated every aspect, from household staff numbers to security systems, ensuring compliance with regulations while accommodating personal preferences. These seemingly mundane details became high-stakes issues, representing broader questions of autonomy, expectation, and influence. And then there were the private negotiations between family members. Sources suggest that financial discussions were sometimes intertwined with personal dynamics. Trust, loyalty, and historical precedent shaped decisions as much as budgetary concerns. Family members reportedly weighed emotional consequences alongside financial ones, attempting to balance fairness with institutional integrity. It was a delicate dance, where missteps could inflame tension, spark leaks, or escalate into public controversy. The media amplified these tensions at every turn. Stories about lavish spending, private jets, and property purchases circulated widely, often exaggerating or distorting the truth. Public perception, fueled by headlines and commentary, became a pressure point in ongoing negotiations. The Sussexes were navigating a world in which financial choices were not just personal, they were performative, symbolic, and highly scrutinized. Amidst all this, questions remained. Could Meghan and Harry maintain independence without their titles? How would public perception affect their financial autonomy? Could private agreements be honored while preserving dignity and reputation? These questions weren't hypothetical. They were central to the palace's strategy and the couple's planning. Every decision carried weight, every compromise had consequences, and the stakes were higher than most people could imagine. One particularly sensitive issue reportedly involved the management of charitable foundations. Both the Sussex Foundation and other affiliated initiatives required transparency, accountability, and compliance with legal and royal protocols. Advisors reportedly monitored these closely, ensuring that the couple's independence did not create conflicts with tradition or public trust. At the same time, Meghan and Harry were determined to maintain control, avoid interference, and assert their autonomy. This tug-of-war underscored the broader theme. Financial independence and royal protocol were in constant tension. And yet, even with all the strategic planning, negotiations, and advice, surprises emerged. Leaks, unauthorized reports, and public scrutiny complicated matters. Advisors were forced to adapt constantly, responding to narratives, clarifying misinformation, and managing expectations. For the couple, the challenge was not just achieving financial stability. It was maintaining credibility, autonomy, and control in a world where every move was analyzed and interpreted. Ultimately, these financial battles were about more than money. They were about power, identity, and control. Losing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles didn't just alter ceremonial status. It reshaped the couple's access to resources, decision-making authority, and public influence. Every negotiation, every dispute, and every agreement reflected the high stakes of life at the intersection of royalty, independence, and modern media. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: the financial battles were far from over. While the palace had asserted authority, and the media had amplified every detail, behind the scenes, negotiations continued. Funding, autonomy, and influence remained contested, leaving open questions about the couple's future and the broader implications for the monarchy. And just when it seemed the financial disputes had reached a peak, new revelations about private agreements and undisclosed communications emerged, hinting at secrets that could reshape not just the couple's independence, but the balance of power within the royal family itself. What really happens when family loyalty clashes with protocol and public expectation? How far can love, resentment, and frustration stretch in a palace steeped in centuries of tradition? The removal of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles wasn't just a public event. It was a family earthquake, shaking alliances, revealing fissures, and exposing tensions that had been quietly brewing for years. From the outside, the royal family appears united, a seamless institution of tradition and dignity. But behind closed doors, the dynamics are far more complicated. Power, expectation, legacy, and emotion all collide. And in this particular moment, the stakes were nothing less than the future of the monarchy and the personal bonds within it. The first signs of tension reportedly surfaced long before the official title removal. Sources indicate that subtle disagreements over appearances, public statements, and media interactions had gradually created friction between the Sussexes and senior royals. Family dinners, once cordial, became fraught with careful phrasing, measured smiles, and unsaid grievances. Advisors quietly noted strained interactions, and staff whispered about a growing sense of unease. What looked like minor conflicts to outsiders were, in reality, indicators of deep-seated tension that would soon explode. King Charles, carrying the weight of both authority and family loyalty, reportedly faced the most difficult balancing act. On one hand, he needed to uphold centuries of tradition, maintaining the integrity of titles, roles, and ceremonial obligations. On the other, he was acutely aware of the personal dimension. A motherless son, a wife determined to assert independence, and a family under global scrutiny. Every decision he made had to consider both the institution and the human beings at its heart. The public may not realize that palace meetings are often emotional as well as strategic. One source described a private session where voices rose, frustrations boiled over, and advisors had to step in to maintain decorum. Discussions that might seem procedural were deeply personal, as family members grappled with perceived betrayals, unmet expectations, and lingering resentments. How do you enforce rules without alienating those you love? How do you balance authority with empathy, tradition with modernity? These were not theoretical questions. They were lived realities in the palace halls. Meghan and Harry, for their part, reportedly felt cornered. Accusations of overstepping boundaries and ignoring protocol collided with their own desire for autonomy and independence. Family dynamics, especially in a household accustomed to hierarchy and centuries of expectation, became battlegrounds for both identity and influence. One insider noted that the couple often felt scrutinized not just for actions, but for intentions, with every move interpreted as either defiance or disrespect. Sibling dynamics added another layer of complexity. Reports suggest that Prince William and Prince Harry's relationship, already complicated by history, was strained further by disagreements over public roles, media portrayals, and family responsibility. Tensions over perceived favoritism, misunderstandings, and unresolved emotional wounds intensified in the wake of the title removal. Observers noted that even minor disagreements took on symbolic significance, interpreted as signs of deeper rifts and conflicts over legacy. And yet, it wasn't all conflict. Moments of empathy and understanding occasionally broke through the tension, highlighting the human side of royal life. Private conversations, sometimes mediated by advisors, reflected efforts to bridge gaps, acknowledge grievances, and maintain family cohesion. But these attempts were fragile, often undermined by public scrutiny, leaks, or miscommunication. For Meghan and Harry, the challenge was navigating a world where personal reconciliation often collided with institutional obligations and media pressure. The media, of course, played a role in magnifying family tensions. Every interaction, from casual gestures to public statements, was dissected for meaning. Observers read into smiles, handshakes, and seating arrangements, interpreting them as signs of loyalty, resentment, or strategic positioning. The result was a feedback loop. Internal tension fueled media coverage, which in turn increased internal stress, creating a cycle that few could escape. Financial pressures intertwined with emotional dynamics, further complicating family relationships. Disagreements over funding, property, and charitable oversight became proxies for deeper issues of trust, respect, and autonomy. Some insiders report heated debates over who had control, who bore responsibility, and what level of oversight was appropriate. The intersection of money and emotion created an environment where every decision carried both practical and symbolic weight. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of these tensions was how history and legacy informed every interaction. The royal family is an institution that exists not only in the present, but also in the shadow of centuries. Every act is weighed against precedent, every decision framed in the context of legacy. For Meghan and Harry, this meant navigating not just family relationships, but the expectations of an institution steeped in tradition. Missteps were not merely personal, they had historical resonance. Insiders described moments of profound emotion during these private family discussions. Tears were shed, voices raised, and words exchanged that would never appear in public. Grief over loss, frustration at perceived misunderstandings, and anxiety over public perception created a volatile mix. For the couple, these interactions were a reminder that stepping back from royal duties was not just a legal or symbolic move. It was an emotional reckoning with the family they loved, respected, and sometimes feared disappointing. The ripple effects of family tension extended beyond the palace. Advisors and staff often became intermediaries, tasked with smoothing relationships, communicating expectations, and managing fallout. This created additional stress, as staffers navigated competing loyalties, confidential information, and the pressure of keeping the family unit intact. Even minor missteps could have outsized consequences, prompting quick interventions, damage control, and strategic recalibration. Public reaction, as always, added another dimension. Supporters of Meghan and Harry often emphasized the emotional toll of family discord, framing the couple as victims of institutional rigidity. Critics, conversely, argued that the couple's independence was a challenge to family cohesion, creating unnecessary tension. The polarization of opinion reinforced the stakes of every private interaction, as the family became conscious not only of internal dynamics, but also of global perception. And yet, amid the tension, moments of strategic calculation persisted. Private meetings often involved careful negotiation. How to maintain relationships, manage public perception, and assert authority without alienating key family members. Advisors reportedly documented every detail, prepared contingency plans, and anticipated potential leaks. Behind the scenes, the palace functioned as both family unit and institution, where emotion and strategy were in constant interplay. One particularly intense source of tension reportedly revolved around public appearances and media statements. The timing, tone, and content of each engagement were carefully scrutinized, as even minor miscommunications could reignite old conflicts. Decisions about invitations, participation in ceremonies, and attendance at events became high-stakes negotiations, reflecting not only logistical concerns but also emotional dynamics, family loyalty, and historical precedent. The media, of course, amplified every crack in the family's unity. Leaks, anonymous statements, and speculative reporting created pressure points that intensified personal conflicts. Each story was dissected, interpreted, and circulated, often framing private disagreements as public drama. For Meghan and Harry, the challenge was managing family relationships while navigating a relentless media ecosystem that turned every interaction into a headline. Ultimately, these family tensions were not isolated. They were part of a broader narrative of change, independence, and modernity. The removal of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles was not merely an administrative decision. It was a catalyst that brought underlying conflicts into the open. Loyalties, frustrations, and emotional complexities were laid bare, providing insight into the human realities behind centuries-old institutions. As these tensions unfolded, one thing became clear. The story of Meghan and Harry's titles was inseparable from the story of family dynamics, loyalty, and legacy. Every decision carried personal, institutional, and historical significance. And as the palace navigated this delicate balance, new developments emerged, unexpected, dramatic, and potentially explosive. When news broke that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry would lose their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, the world reacted, and the reaction was explosive. Social media erupted instantly, trending hashtags multiplied, and news outlets scrambled to cover the story. But beyond the initial shock, the global backlash revealed far deeper tensions, political debates, cultural arguments, and questions about the relevance of monarchy in the modern age. In the UK, public sentiment split almost immediately. Some hailed the palace's decision as a necessary step to uphold tradition and accountability. Opinion polls indicated that a portion of the population believed Harry and Meghan had acted outside the bounds of their roles and should face consequences. Headlines framed the decision as a restoration of order, a reaffirmation of centuries of protocol. But others criticized it as unnecessarily harsh, a symbolic punishment that seemed out of touch with modern values. Social media became a battleground, with passionate supporters and detractors engaging in heated debates that spilled into live streams, blogs, and mainstream news commentary. Outside the UK, reactions were equally intense. Across Europe, North America, and parts of Asia, public opinion ranged from sympathy to fascination. News reports highlighted the emotional impact of losing a title once considered lifelong, framing it as both personal tragedy and institutional drama. Social media users from diverse cultures compared this situation to other historical royal controversies, creating an international conversation about duty, personal freedom, and modern monarchy. One observer even described the global reaction as a perfect storm of curiosity, outrage, and empathy. Memes, GIFs, and viral videos played a surprisingly significant role in shaping the narrative. While some were lighthearted or satirical, others carried sharp criticism or subtle commentary about the monarchy and its treatment of Meghan and Harry. Humor, irony, and emotional storytelling all merged, reinforcing perceptions and often shaping opinion before official statements could even clarify facts. For many, social media was the first lens through which they experienced the controversy, creating a sense of immediacy and emotional engagement. Traditional media also intensified the scrutiny. Newspapers, magazines, television news, and digital outlets published endless analyses, commentary, and interviews. Experts debated the historical precedent of removing titles, while royal watchers speculated about personal relationships behind the scenes. Every statement from the palace, every public appearance of Meghan or Harry, was dissected for meaning, reinforcing the sense that the couple's lives had become a stage on which global audiences projected judgment, fascination, and curiosity. One particularly striking element of public backlash involved political commentary. Some commentators framed the decision as emblematic of systemic issues within the monarchy. Accountability, transparency, and the balance of personal autonomy against institutional expectations. Others criticized the media's role in perpetuating narratives that heightened tension and fueled division. The discussion went beyond gossip. It became a global debate about leadership, responsibility, and the evolving role of tradition in modern society. In the UK, public demonstrations and online campaigns reflected the passion of opinion. Supporters of Meghan and Harry expressed outrage, emphasizing themes of fairness, independence, and personal choice. Opponents highlighted tradition, duty, and the importance of adhering to established roles. Analysts noted that the emotional intensity of these debates was amplified by the couple's celebrity status, media savvy, and the inherently public nature of royal life. Each side leveraged social media to spread narratives, mobilize support, and challenge opponents, creating a feedback loop that intensified public attention. Internationally, the reactions were nuanced and varied. In the United States, opinion pieces explored themes of individualism, gender equality, and modern celebrity culture. Many Americans expressed sympathy for the couple's desire for independence, framing the title removal as a cautionary tale about institutional rigidity. In other countries, commentators highlighted the global fascination with British royalty, noting that Meghan and Harry's story had become a lens through which broader societal questions about power, privilege, and personal choice could be examined. The economic implications of public backlash were also significant. Royal-related tourism, merchandise, and media contracts all experienced temporary fluctuations as public interest surged. Analysts noted that controversy